Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be making a card using some 3D foam flowers. And the first step is to do some die cutting. So I used the Spellbinders die, Blooming Rose, and die cut out of white foamaran. I happen to be using Tonic Studios foam, but there are a lot of different brands out there. And what I'm going to start off by doing is coloring it with some Jane Davenport Pastel. And so I'm using the baton blender that is also available from Jane Davenport, which I like just because it's longer than the standard sort of eye makeup sponges that you can get that are very similar in design. And these seem to hold up really well too. I've actually sort of washed the ends with just some plain water and soap and have just continued to reuse them. So they last a long time, even though they're meant to be disposable. So I'm using some of the pink colors to give a nice sort of soft wash of color on all of these petals, and I've die cut all 6 sizes of the front that come in the die, and multiples of each size as well, because usually when I do my 3D flowers using foam, I generally layer multiple sizes on top of each other, and sometimes even multiple die cuts of the same size too. And I'm going for a little bit of an ombre look where it's darker in the center and a little bit lighter out towards the edges. And you can be messy about this. There's no, this will all get sort of evened out in the next step when it gets heat set and distressed. And so one thing that you do want to do though is to color both sides so that you don't end up with weight on the back of the petals. And even though you don't see a lot of the back, you will see some of it. So you do want to make sure you get a little bit of color onto the back as well. And this particular set of flower forming dies does have a little circle that's cut, or hole that's cut out of the center, and that's convenient if you plan to use some of the stamens that you can sort of insert through the center there. I will probably finish these off with flatback pearls or gem in the center, just because I like the look of that sometimes better. And so I'm just gonna create a couple of different colored flowers. I don't know yet what I'll end up using on my card, but I just want to make a lot of them just so that I have different colors, different sizes available to me. And so some will be in pink and some will be in the lavender color that you saw earlier as well. Now, if you don't have the Jane Davenport pastels, there are a lot of different other ways that you can color your petals. So you can use an ink pad. I've used Distress Oxide inks before. You can use gelatos. I've used my gelatos to color before. And you can even use alcohol markers and or even water-based markers as well. So a lot of different ways that you can color your petals, and that's one of the reasons why having white foamaran is really nice, because you can color it to whatever you want, and if you're using those very same colors elsewhere on your card, you will have flowers that match perfectly. And I use these both on my card making as well as on my mini album covers too. So a lot of times it can be really nice to always keep white foam on hand. Now, if you don't want that, you could always use colored foam, because that's always an option as well. And I've also colored over top of colored foam just to give it a little bit more depth of color. So like you can see here, I'm trying to concentrate a lot of that intense color more in the center. And sometimes starting with a colored foam, you just don't have to use as much of your medium. You can just add just that little bit of extra shadow or depth right in the center. So a lot of different ways that you can kind of achieve a similar or the same look. And definitely when you're coloring, don't worry if it's a little bit blotchy, if it's a little bit streaky. It doesn't really matter, because a lot of that is not going to be, it will even out during the heating and shaping process. So here I've got some leaves that also come in this die set, and we get a couple different sizes and selection of leaves, and so I've just colored those with green. And then my next step is to add a little bit of extra detail using Mermaid Markers from Jane Davenport. So here, it's one of the nice things about these markers is that you have a really nice fine brush tip. So I was able to get some really nice sort of flick marks and add even more intensity of color to the centers of my flowers and a little bit of that veining detail to the leaves. So if you've never used these before, there is that little yellow ring that you just need to unscrew the top portion of your pen. Take that yellow ring off, screw the top portion back in, and then on the barrel of the pen towards the top where you hold it, there's a little press here on the barrel. So you just press a little bit, and when you're pressing for the first time, maybe do that over some scratch paper like I did here, not over your project, because sometimes, like I did here, I got a big ink blob that came out. But once you have that ink flowing, it will flow nicely. I find that I don't even really have to press down on the barrel from then on. It just really wicks nicely and smoothly. So here I'm starting that one again, and so really, really nice combination because the colors coordinate really, really well, and I really, really like the fine tip brush on these markers because you can see I get nice fine flick marks on my petals, which kind of makes it have that extra little bit of detail and while intensifying the center as well. So you can already see before we've even heat set it that there's already a lot of really nice color that's building up on these petals. And once you heat set it, and I like to use a distressing tool as well to give a little bit extra texture and realism so that the petals don't look perfect and you know, perfectly match each other. They all are a little bit wrinkly, have a little bit different shape to them. But once the heat is applied, it really does even out the colors and even spreads the color out a little bit because the foam will shrink a little bit. And in distressing the petals, you'll see the technique in a little bit here. It also sort of spreads out that color a little bit. So to do the shaping, I just use a regular household iron, and I put it on the cotton setting, which is on the hotter side. So you just want to be careful when you're doing this. I use tweezers, and I'm putting this so that the front side where I've got that extra mermaid marker applied to it, I'm putting that face out so that the back of the flower is what's touching the iron. And when it curls up a little, I let it drop, and then you can see I fold it on itself, and I have just, you know, the front sides touching each other, and that's where some of that color from the pastel will sort of rub off on some of the other petals and smooth out a little bit. Now that purple mat that I'm working on and that little finger caught, that's a Crafter's Companion flower distressing tool, and basically both the mat and the finger caught have ridges, and as you fold up this flower and just run it across that mat using the finger cut, you get a really nice wrinkly distressed effect. And I like to do that right as the flower petals come off the iron while it's still warm, because the foam is more malleable and it'll shape a lot easier and take on new shapes a lot easier. You can definitely shape and mold the foam without applying heat, but I find that you don't get quite as much of that detail. And as well, once it's heat set like this, it also tends to hold its shape really well once that foam has cooled. So I find that this technique just yields, flowers that look, to my eyes, a little bit more realistic than if I didn't apply heat or if I used paper, for example, instead of foam. So that's it for the heat setting and distressing. And now that I have all of my flower petals distressed, I'm going to just do some extra shaping and then assemble them. So here I'm using a ball stylus flower forming ball tool. Again, this set happens to be from Crafter's Companion, but there are a lot of different sets out there. And in fact, instead of buying craft ones, you could also buy this set here, which is clay molding. And that I find is a little bit less expensive than the crafting version. So I find that a lot of times things marketed in the paper crafting or scrapbooking department, sometimes you can find similar or the exact same tools, in fact, in other types of craft, but they cost less sometimes. So you can definitely shop around and look for clay or cake molding, because some of these tools are used for cakes as well, cake decorating. So what I'm doing is using the ball to just sort of stretch the petal around it and give it a little bit more shape, and only towards the center, the portion of the petal that's closest to the center. So I'm not going to lose all of that distressing that we just created. A lot of that's going to stay at the edges of the flower petal, while in that center area, it's going to be a little bit more rounded, a little bit more straight, and cupped inward a little bit. So once I have those set, I'll go ahead and stack them, and I stack them in a way that's staggered so that the petals aren't lined up exactly with each other, but rather one petal will be set between two petals on below it. And that way you get a really nice full and round and a slightly more organic look to your flowers too. And then the other thing with heat setting and doing all the distressing and all the shaping is you can even see on my flower petals here how irregular those petals look, even though they were die cut from the same die. And so that's one reason that I really love making foam flowers, because each petal does end up looking very individual and unique. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm stacking, for my largest flower here, that was 7 layers of petals in 3 different sizes. Now, you could definitely just play around with how many petals you want to stack and of how many of each size as well. Usually for the smaller ones, I don't have as many layers, and maybe I don't use as many different sizes. So that's just up to you. Whatever looks best to your eyes, you can just kind of play. What I did was, before I started filming, I just stacked them without glue, just to get a sense for how they looked. The other thing is that I am using a liquid PVA glue. This is Lineco pH neutral, and it is a water-based glue. So the one thing to keep in mind is to not use too much of it. here I'm just making a little rose bud, which ultimately in the end I didn't use, but I just wanted to show that you could. So this has no distressing. I just let it drop off of the iron and keep that really nice curved shape. So what I was saying with the PVA glue is that because that's water-based and the mermaid markers are water-based, you could activate your mermaid markers and it just ends up being a little bit more intense in color, and that may not be what you want the tops of your flowers to look. So you want to be very sparing with your adhesive, or use something like a hot glue gun, or you could possibly maybe use a solvent-based glue, perhaps, that may not activate the water-based markers. And so just something to be aware of. I, as you saw, just put like little dots of glue, and that did activate the ink, but only on the back side, and it wasn't visible through to the front. Okay, so you saw me just emboss a panel using a Fun Stamper's Journey embossing folder. That one, I think, was called Love Stripes. And this little bit of organza ribbon is just from my stash. And I thought I had it on straight with my T-roller, but apparently somehow I just didn't line up my T-roller quite flush. And so I did adjust, or will adjust the ribbon here in a sec to really get that nice and straight. And here I'm just going to use my grid mat, and that worked out just fine. And so I'll go ahead and attach this banner. I really like the white on white of embossing a panel, but just leaving it white and putting it on a white card base. And my panel is cut to just a bit smaller than my card base. So this is an US A2 size card, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I think I cut that panel to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. So very, very thin border all the way around. And I like using my Make Art Station so that I can put a magnet down and just kind of compose my card. A lot of times, in this case, because I'm using something really dimensional, I'm not using the magnets to keep down those aspects of my card, but it can be really helpful if you have a lot of mats and layers to use the magnets to kind of keep the decorative items down where you want to place them, and as you compose the rest of your card around it. I'm working on my sentiment, which I foiled using one of the Spellbinders Glimmer foil sentiment sets. This one reads Birthday Wishes, and I just foiled that out of gold, which I think I used actually the foil from the We Are Memory Keepers hot foil. So that works, it seems, perfectly well with the Glimmer system too. And I found that the Crafter's Companion hot foils also work in the Glimmer machine as well. So you can definitely, if you have different hot foils, so not the kind of foil that will go through your Mink or laminator, but it does need to be the kind of foil that requires heat and pressure. A lot of different brands will also work in the Glimmer machine. So all of those petals that I die cut and colored ultimately came out to 5 different little rose buds or flowers, and so I'm just playing around with the composition and how I want to arrange them across this card. And so once I have that decided, I'm going to put my sentiment down with some foam, and then I'm going to adhere my flowers down. And for that, I actually use some 3D Kalau glue gel, and I should mention that I did color the leaves the same way that I colored the petals, but I did not distress and heat set them. So they're a little bit more flat, but and a little bit more, cookie cutter because they haven't been distressed. But I rather like that because I do want them to stay a little bit more flat to the card, since they are just getting tucked kind of in the back. So one of the reasons why I really like using the Kalau 3D glue gel is because in this case, I'm not using it for the dimension that you can get with it, but you can just add sort of these blobs of glue, and if you don't press down all the way, it's another way of adding some dimension or some height to your die cuts instead of using foam. But the reason why I'm using it in this application, and you can see I am pressing down all the way, is to give myself a lot of wiggle room and time to move and adjust these flowers around, especially as I find places to kind of tuck the leaves in from behind. And so because it does take a little bit of time for this glue to set up, so once you have this composed the way that you want, you do want to give it plenty of time to dry before you give the card out or send it out. But I really like having all that time so that I can lift things up and move things around, nudge it around a little bit as needed. And it does come, you can buy the glue with the little syringe tool that I'm using here, and you just kind of refill that syringe as you use it up. So that's my card. I think that these flowers turned out really, really well. I've never used Pastel before, and I knew one of the first things I wanted to do was try to color foam with it so that I could make these 3D foam flowers. And this may just be my favorite way to color white foam and create 3D foam flowers. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you like this video, please do consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to my channel if you want to see more videos. I do have other cards that I've made using the Jane Davenport media supplies, and so I'll link to those in the description box below if you want to check those out. Happy crafting, and until my next video, have a fantastic day. Thanks. Bye.